The language of deceit. Notes and extracts. The rise and fall. The teachings of Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas referenced currencies as a tool for the whole of society's well-being. Their purpose was to add opportunity and value to society and create economies of scale. After all, a human measure of fair exchange allowed trust to be built and commerce to commence. An honest system could work, but the holistic nature of everything is that wherever there is a great benefit to some, it often comes at a tragic loss to others. The devil himself is a great fan of man. The current international money system, which is found in most countries, is based on the privately owned federal, meaning connected but independent, Bank of England model. Now ubiquitous thanks to the policies of the great British Empire, which invaded and subjugated almost half of the planet. Nevertheless, there are some quiet, notable variations and exceptions, such as the Icelandic money system. Perhaps on a small island, it is difficult to mask true intention or real consequence. Through evaluating the history and the present, which is the intention here, one might get the sense of advantages or disadvantages of the current monetary system. Then again, one might wish to be blind and never have seen the things that we have seen. Banks and bankers thrive through the process of the lending of plenty of money to people. And then, when there is more than enough money in circulation, they, for completely arbitrary reasons, shut down the money supply. The result is that there is not enough money to pay back the debts incurred, and many businesses go bankrupt. People lose their jobs and livelihoods, and so the domino effect continues across society. A collapse of any economy is just another chance to hit the reset button and begin the whole distribution and collection service all over again. Wherever you live, you must understand that every penny, every dollar or pound or yen or euro that we now have in circulation was created as an interest-bearing debt. And somebody has to pay. Sadly, and usually, this occurs at the wrong end of the spectrum. Money in our current international system is created by commercial banks owned by private bankers. They lend it to government. They lend it to companies. They lend it to individuals, all with wonderful incentives that include tagged-on interest that creates unpayable bills. The private banks can lend almost 10 times more money than they actually have. This is termed fractional reserve lending. They conjure money just as a wizard in a pointy hat might conjure an apple. The national debt is then calculated as the money any government owes to banks. It is paid by tax collection, which remains just a terrible euphemism for wealth redistribution. Society, firm in its belief that without a universal system of collection, there would be no roads or schools or hospitals or law enforcement, generally praises this endeavour. The average person, however, knows little about the history of money and less about the history of how free people are always enslaved by their own lack of knowledge. The fact is that the majority of the United States system was built without any tax on individual labour and with very little taxation on business transactions. Historians themselves are complicit in the crime of corrupt cooperation through their relative silence on this topic. And not until the 20th century did the banks finally find a way to throttle and subvert the great capitalist Republican scheme. Woodrow Wilson himself admitted this towards the end of the First World War. So, under the guise of many commercial and private taxes, all extracted through legislation and under the threat of force, we live. It's pay now or pay later. It's conformed to the norm, which of course was at one time not normal. But the tragedy of history is our own collective forgetfulness. The legal is not always practical or lawful. Through a consistent and reinforced marketing campaign, both overt and covert, through all channels of media, the general public is persuaded to vote for the next political electorate, who will perpetuate the same errors as their predecessor, or even add to the already ensuing calamity. Little gets reversed as society marches forward. And so the people invest in their own demise. There is even a strong argument for the idea that if voting actually changed anything, then people would be forbidden from doing it. It does, however, make people feel better and give them something to talk about. Nations such as the United States of America sell US bonds, which are an official promise to pay. They sell the bonds to banks, which the banks buy with money they create out of thin air. And in a bizarre reversal of logic, the public is often persuaded to themselves buy bonds and invest in their own demise as government borrowing just increases. Happy to see short-term gains, the future momentarily seems irrelevant. However, the short-term mindset never avoids the long-term consequences. There are, or were, many systems of money down throughout time. After all, money is anything that the majority of people can be persuaded has value. The most prominent example of a minted currency was during the Roman Empire. Around about 300 BC, the Roman elected government supplied people with plentiful forms of cheap money made from copper and bronze. The empire flourished through its projected wealth and its wide-reaching collection of taxes and other resources from whomsoever they conquered. But the money was there for everybody, not just for the rich. Although slavery existed, with enough skill and dexterity, people were able to buy some semblance of freedom. The Romans quickly discovered that it does not matter what metal backs the money, but it does matter who controls its quantity. After Julius Caesar's assassination, which just proved that nature and villainy abhor a vacuum, the quantity of money was reduced by 90% and availability was severely limited. Eventually, the cheap money was completely removed from circulation. The rich got power and wealth, and the populace was plunged into disarray and a deep depression. The goldsmiths had control, not just of the making of coins, but also of the quantity of coinage. And once commerce was restricted, the Dark Age commenced. By 1100 AD, in England, similarly to Rome, the goldsmiths were in control of making money, and they were tightly reining in its quantity, just as today's banks do. Controlling the money supply gifted them control of the economy and the political climate. Politicians were for sale, just as slaves were. Depending upon how much money the lenders put into circulation, the nation blossomed or declined. Huge swathes of the population lived and died as issuance expanded or contracted. Booms saw swells in population, while busts saw war, disease, and famine rampant. This altered when King Hendrey I, another long-forgotten monarch, created a unique form of government-issued money called tally sticks, which essentially were just marked, broken pieces of wood or bones that represented a contract. Tally sticks issued by the king, which he declared to be good for the payment of taxes, did not represent any quantity of gold or any other commodity. They were simply local, devolved examples of financial agreements. Tally sticks were used to pay wages to workers and dues to the state. People used them to buy and sell items, just as if they were coins. They were, after all, an IOU, a pledge by whoever issued them to pay to whoever happened to possess them. Tallies were used for numerous purposes, such as messaging and scheduling, especially in financial and legal transactions. Tally sticks were just as good as any other form of money which were debt-free. 95% of money was at one time in the form of these sticks. Trust was the bond, and England prospered, especially the middle class. In 1265, the first parliamentary elections were held. An early attempt at government by the people was born. This relieved some of the pressure on the upper classes and gave a voice, albeit only parliamentary, to a once voiceless nation. There was at least the theoretical opportunity for representation alongside taxation. The split tally of the Exchequer remained in continuous use in England until 1826. In 1834, tally sticks representing 6 centuries' worth of financial records were ordered to be burned in 2 furnaces in the Houses of Parliament. The resulting fire set the chimney ablaze and then spread until most of the building was destroyed. An event described by Charles Dickens in an 1855 article on administrative reform. After 6 centuries, there was an abrupt U-turn in controlling the flow of money. Enough was enough, and the upper echelons feared that the wealth of the middle class represented a threat to their systems of control. Fear replaced trust. Goldsmiths heavily lobbied and persuaded the Parliament to create the Bank of England, which, although sounding wonderfully nationalistic in title and principle, just led to the government borrowing money with added interest instead of issuing its own debt-free currency. During the banker-funded wars that followed and distracted attention from the real culprits of the conflict, the country was slowly overburdened with 75% of its budget paying debts. England struggled and was almost forced to expand and to milk more money from its colonies to keep up with the payments. Expansion of the empire was expansion of the taxable base. The farm needed more fields and more livestock to feed the insatiable appetite of the goldsmith. The language of deceit, notes and extracts.